Welcome to the Radical Responsibility Revolution podcast. This is where we are transforming lives, inspiring you to reclaim your health, your wealth, and the power of your mind. Here we share actionable insights, inviting you to turn inwards and design your life of purpose and abundance. Welcome back to another episode of Radical Responsibility Revolution. And today's conversation is one that I've been looking forward to for weeks. My guest, Kat Polsinelli, is a speaker. She's a survivor and an advocate who is doing profoundly important work in spaces most people don't fully understand: domestic violence, emotional and psychological abuse, law enforcement training. I'd love to hear all of this, and higher education. Kat spent a decade in an abusive relationship, raising two young boys while navigating a reality that from the outside didn't always look like what people imagine abuse to be. Her experience wasn't defined only by physical harm, but by the psychological, by the emotional, and the invisible dynamics that so often go unseen, misunderstood, or minimized. What makes Kat's work so powerful is not just her story, but where she's taking it now. She speaks directly to law enforcement officers, which is just so brilliant, universities, and future social workers, helping them understand the hidden context behind these domestic violence calls, the trauma responses, and the survivor behavior. She is now bridging compassion with accountability, education with lived truth. So I love this idea that she's in the process of building a non-profit designed to provide long-term, meaningful support for survivors, especially those who never received it when they needed it most. This is a conversation that is so about agency, healing, responsibility, systems, truth, and hope. And I am honored to share it with you. So please welcome my new friend, Kat, to this audience. I am so happy that you are here. I know there's so much to talk about, but I want to talk about what is it about this nonprofit? It's so beautiful what you're doing for the world.
Oh, thank you so much. And Debbie, just by the way, what a beautiful introduction. Like, I need you to rewrite my bio for me so we can kind of.
Sure.
Oh,
I get
no,
asked
but
that all the time. It's like, okay.
so yeah, the nonprofit. Here's the thing. When I first got into the entrepreneurial space, we'll say that, and I really started sharing my story several years ago, I kind of had this little nagging in the back of my brain, like, we should start a nonprofit. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't even know what that means. We'll come back to that later. And so I pushed it off, like, so many times we do. We get like that little voice. It's like, you should do this. And you're
Yep.
like, absolutely not. That makes zero sense. And
Yep.
so I just kept putting it away. And it was actually, um, last year when I was speaking with a specific speaking bureau that was going to be speaking directly to colleges and universities and high school students, which is really the space I wanted to grow in. And I realized from what they were telling me was that there are not a lot of places that are willing to pay someone who wants to speak solely on domestic violence, right? If we want to speak about boundaries and bring it in or resiliency, then, if we can kind of frame it somewhere else and kind of not talk about it, but kind of talk, then they were like, then we can see that. But otherwise, there's just not a lot of places. And that infuriated me. Not with the company. I appreciated their honesty and everything, but just the simple fact that this is such a common issue. Okay, I know everybody's going to be like, absolutely not. Yes, this is a very
Oh,
common issue with domestic violence. And yet we treat it as if, oh, it happens like once in a lifetime, right? Or once to every 150 people or more. Like, this is not a problem that we are going to solve if we continue to sweep it under the rug. And then I really got to thinking about how do we start having this conversation on a wider scale? And up pops this idea again of a nonprofit. And I'm like, okay, here we go. I'm ready for it. Let's think about it. And the whole point is to create a space where we can provide support, education, resources, and communities to help people make better decisions. I know that I can't by myself eradicate domestic violence, nor can I necessarily prevent everyone from ending up in that situation. But what I can do is create a space where people feel supported, heard, and understand this is not a one in a million chance that this happened to you, and give them the opportunity to decide to do something different, which in a lot of cases, when it comes to domestic violence, we have lost that decision. We have been controlled. Everything has been taught for us. Somebody has decided it or said enough to make us decide to do it their way for fear of what might be the outcome. And so we've had that taken away. I want to be able to give that back because myself and every other survivor I've ever talked to, we made the decision to change. We made the decision to move forward, to do something different. It's the same thing in the space of entrepreneurship. It's the same thing in the job that you're in, the relationship that you chose to do that. And there's power in knowing that you made that choice.
Yeah. Well, that's why this is called radical responsibility revolution, because you're part of a revolution for people to take responsibility for their choices and not to have their agency taken away from them. And it's so interesting to look at you. You're so vibrant. You have so much enthusiasm, which are all those energies and frequencies that I come from. So it's resonating like crazy. And yet you haven't always been there. And that's why I want to just step back to a little bit of where you came from, because you were in an abusive relationship. And that is not necessarily what people perceive it to be. I think somebody said to me not too long ago that we were talking about autism, and they said, "You don't understand. Autism doesn't look one way, neither does domestic violence." So you are raising
Absolutely.
children. You felt not what you feel now, empowered, right? You didn't feel like you had agency. So let's take us back to where you were, what that looked like. And as you just said, there's survivors out there that feel like they didn't get a pathway that you are now opening a new door towards. So share some of those complications, those blocks that you felt, that you are now opening a different door for people.
Ooh, such a good question. Um, yeah, so let's see. Let's keep it, let me see if I can keep it brief. Just yell at me, Debbie. Because I love to talk. So
Don't worry
when
about
I think about my domestic violence situation, one of the things that I really love to bring up to everyone before I kind of jump into and explain those pieces is I actually had a really great childhood growing up. So I don't fit a
it.
lot of the stigmas that a lot of people say, oh, well, she's probably just experienced hardship her entire life. Nope. Like I actually had a really great household. Very religious, a little strict, is what it is, but very beautiful household and have yelling and screaming from my parents. They didn't really fight in front of us. I was the oldest of three girls. I had a lot of amazing things going for me. But I made some shifts and decisions in my life as a teenager that led me to being more susceptible to wanting to be loved by someone else. And that led into that relationship. That relationship lasted 10 years. So I was in that relationship from 18 to 28. I had two boys during that relationship. So they were 10 and 7 when I left that relationship. And I went from being a very vibrant, outgoing, speak up for other kind of person to a very quiet, keep my head down, avoid the conversations, but also very explosive and controlling in my job. So very interesting, right?
Mhm.
And I say that because you, like you said, domestic violence shows up very different for every single person. So we tend to think that, okay, well, there should be signs, right? She should have bruises or she's maybe cowardly and everybody takes advantage. Absolutely not. One, I didn't have bruises. Mine was a lot more psychological and emotional. There were times where hands were put on me, but my ex was very aware of where his hands were put and if he would leave marks. So he was very smart when it came to that. I worked a successful medical job. I was actually an administrator and oversaw a company at one point in time, but I was also the person that didn't deal with people's crap. So I was very quick, very reactive. If somebody had issues, I was very quick to shut people down. I wanted things done my specific way, and people just saw that as a leader. That was
Hmm.
because it was the only space that I had control in, because when we were at home, I didn't have that, right? So it's interesting when you start to talk about it looking very different for people, and I appreciate you bringing this up because we seem to think, and we've been taught this, that abuse means abuses. It means bruises, right? But there are so many other aspects of abuse, from financial abuse and not being able to make enough money to even get away, or what I had, which is emotional, psychological. And to be completely honest, a lot of those things overlap each other. It's not one form, it always ends up
Right.
being a multiplication of that. But it depends on what is going on in that person's life, and it depends on who they are inward before they were taken control of. And some of that is still going to come out. I was still a compassionate person. I still wanted to help people, but that ended up looking more like a yes person with no boundaries than
Yeah.
where I am at today, right? Today, I know what to say yes and no to most of the time. And I know how to give myself space, and I know what I want to be around and what I don't want to be around. Where before, I was just happy to have anything because it meant something different than what I had at home. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, it's different in every variety you could think of.
Yeah. So I love that though, because it gives people a different context of how this looks, and it really is taking away your agency. And of course, nobody can take our agency away, but it feels like they do, right? Because that's
Absolutely.
when we have our own responsibility for accepting that. But yet there is that place where we put ourselves, as you said, you got into it because you wanted to be loved, right? So that's the first anchor that pulls you in. And then, as you said, there could be some financial connection. And I hear this all the time about women that are in abusive relationships, that they can't leave because they have now relegated all of their financial responsibilities to somebody else. So it's these layered effects that start with the first step. So talk about how you now have created a different door to give that information to survivors. And then we'll talk about the law enforcement, how you've given that new door to survivors in a different way than, say, for instance, I don't know, for me, I would just go, oh, well, maybe you need to go to a shelter. I don't know anything. I get that from watching The Rookie. But the fact is that literally, it's just we don't know what we don't know because I haven't
Absolutely.
experienced it from that perspective. There's not a lot of information, as you said. So, what do you share with them, that first step that they could take to get into a different space?
Yeah, so definitely, and I love this perspective as well, because again, I know that most people do want to help. We do want to be able to do things, but we also see things very logically. So if somebody is coming to you and they're kind of explaining things, you're like, well, he's a piece of crap. You should just leave. Did it? Like, we're very quick versus being able to hear what is going on, because that could be that small cry for help, right? And that's what I generally see is it's as if we are testing the water to see if someone is listening, which then also lets us know that we're not crazy, right? So
And
we
safe, right? And
Correct.
safe.
So we may
Yeah.
say something, and maybe it's just like, oh, well, the other night we had a really big fight, and he, threw something, but it didn't hit me. I'm totally fine. And you kind of gauge that reaction, right? And depending on how someone reacts may depend on if you decide to be bold enough to say something more, right? So you are kind of testing the waters. For me, it was first learning that everything that he was saying wasn't true. And that took a really long time. I was probably 7, 8 years in that relationship, when I kind of had this really big light bulb moment, or I call it, when you walk into a stop sign because you're not paying attention, you just smack straight in the face. That's kind of what it felt like, just smacked straight in the face.
Mm,
And my boys were 5 and 7 at the time. And I remember having an argument in our tiny little house, and they were down the hallway in their room, but they had come in because we were arguing like we always did, and they were always around and aware of it. And they came in and they each stood beside him as we were yelling back and forth. And I remember both of them looking at me, their hands on their hips, and they're like, "Yeah, Mom,
mm,
you're the bad person. This is your fault. You're so mean to Dad." And I remember pausing in that moment and thinking, absolutely not. How dare you think of me like that? And that's when
mm,
I realized I am literally teaching them
mhm.
what it is to be in a relationship.
Hmm.
And so if I don't change myself, how can I expect them to change? And, you know, I always tell everybody that that happened 7 to 8 years. It still took me almost 2.5 years to get out of it. It wasn't like I just made the decision. I was like, okay, we're done. I'm deciding and I'm out. Absolutely not, because there's so much fear. And like you said, so
Yeah.
many layers of everything else that has already been built up that you can't just rip that band-aid off. That is like opening the wound that needs stitches. And
Yeah.
so what I realized was I needed to do something different. I wasn't sure what that was, but I was going to do something different. And so the first thing for me was, as much as I possibly could, I wasn't going to yell and scream back. I was going to shut up because I was not going to fuel his fire. Now,
Yeah.
that caused more issues. I remember him screaming in my face and screaming in my ear as close as he could get, to the point where it would ring because he couldn't get any reaction out of me, which ticked him off even more. Um, and it was small things like that. And that let me know, like, okay, it's not just me. He's willing to do it regardless. So, what I really had to do was learn to rebuild my own belief system to
Hmm.
give me the feeling of I am not this person and everything that he thinks. I am my own human being. And when you get in a relationship like that, you do tend to lose yourself, whether they deliberately do it or not. You lose who you are because the fear of not being loved becomes the main aspect, right? And so I had to learn to separate myself. And that's what kind of started creating that first moment. So I would say, you know, if there is anyone that is in that situation, be aware of the things that you see on repeat and
Yeah.
choose to do something different on your side and see if it continues. Maybe that will help you understand that it's not just you.
Yeah. I think that is so brilliant. And it's so interesting how we don't realize, as the human species, how much we are brainwashed by so many things. This is an example of it, but we get brainwashed in business environments. And as you're telling that story, I remember when I was in my 20s and I was working for this lawyer. He was this big, giant, brusque guy. And I remember back then, he would always say to me, "You don't think." And that became such a mantra. At some point, I began to incorporate that into my beingness. And so, just to accentuate that so many folds for what you went through and what women are going through on a regular basis, whether it be in their relationships, in their friendships, in their business environments, out on the street. It's so fascinating how we aren't taking agency over ourselves. For you, what is the difference in how you are believing in yourself now that you weren't believing in yourself back then? And just talk about that arc a little bit, because I know you talked about, well, it's I'm going to begin to look at myself differently, but it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens over a period of time. So talk about that journey.
100%. You know, the couple of years trying to get out of that relationship was always this cycle of what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? What does this mean? Maybe I should just wait, right? And I say one of the biggest examples I love to give is when I decided to leave that relationship, it actually wasn't my call.
Mm.
So a lot of people, you know, will say, I made that decision. I've decided to do this. We had a really bad fight one morning after my kids went to school, and I had bruises on me. It was one of the very first times I had instantaneous bruises. My lip was busted. I had bruises on my arms and my back. And afterward, he drove me to work. So I went to work. I went to the bathroom. I cried it all out. And I was like, okay, I have work to do. I can't lose my job. I'll figure out what to do later. And what I noticed was we had a patient that had been coming in every single month for a couple of years that I worked there. And I was getting to know them because they were usually one of our very last patients at the end of the day, and they were getting their law degree. And I thought, "Oh, I'm going to ask some questions. Like, I'm not going to give anything away, but I'm going to ask some questions so I can maybe just get an idea of the law, and I'll feel a little bit better, and then I can decide what I want to do." So, funny enough, he actually was the very first patient we had that morning. So I go to the back and we do the therapy, and I know I asked some questions. Couldn't tell you what on earth it was that I said. But when we got done, he said, "Ma'am, you have two options before I leave here today." He said, "Either you call the police or I call them for you. I work in the domestic violence center at the courthouse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about a moment of what? And so I did. I made that decision. I did make the call, but that was not my call in the beginning. And had that intervention not happened, I probably would have went back home. That happened even after I continued to fight. After I left, I had multiple instances where I was like, I don't understand. This isn't right. Why am I crying myself to sleep when I got away from this individual? I should be happy. Instead, I'm ticked off at myself. Um, I had him rearrested for stalking about 45 days later. Um, so it was constantly court battles and things like that, all the things that continue to beat you down. I had a judge call me a liar while I was on the stand trying to explain my truth. So I say that to explain that we always will face instances where, like you
Hmm.
said, somebody has their own belief and they may pound it into you about what their belief is.
Yeah.
But I had to choose that I knew
Yeah.
what I believed and I knew what had happened to me and I knew the decision I had made and I wasn't going back on it. And that is a hard thing to do because it means that you are putting yourself into a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns. But I knew that those unknowns had to be better than everything I had been dealing with before.
Right.
Because while that was normal to me and it was familiar, I didn't want that to be my son's lives. So
Yeah.
that was the transition. Um, and even to this day, it's been 11 years since I left that relationship, and I still have moments where things come up. I feel that shame, I feel that guilt. I'm afraid to share parts of my story for what people might
Mhm.
think. And I have to remind myself that my story is just the things that I've been through, but it doesn't define who I am. And there are
Right.
other people that are suffering silently a lot more than I did that are still choosing today not to share. And if I can be the voice for them and that
Yeah.
causes a shift, then to me, it matters to
Yeah.
open my mouth and be that individual.
Yeah. I had a guy on yesterday that was talking about he'd had multiple affairs and drug addiction and a whole lot of things and the shame. And it was interesting to hear a man talk about shame. And yet it is those places of shame and guilt that we have the most gift to give. And when we can reveal that and put sunlight on it, the best disinfectant, that it actually is empowering for other people. So I bless you for everything that you have done up until now and what you will continue to do. And I love this new experience now that you're speaking to universities, you're speaking to law enforcement, because who doesn't need to hear this information? And I do want to just bring this in context of when you shared that when somebody's in a vulnerable position like you were, we're testing people to see if it's safe to talk to them more. So that is probably one of the best things that we can do, any of us, is when we come across somebody that may possibly be in that environment, that we come with an open heart, that we come with that safety and that ability for them to share and be vulnerable. But let's talk about that from what you're teaching now, because I just love this so much. And just you got out there, you started speaking, and now it's just turned into this beautiful revolution.
Thank you. And yes, you're so right. We really have to take a step back and remember that other people are going through things that we don't understand, that we don't see, that we may never know about. And it requires us being able to give people grace. We are such a reactive society because we've been taught to be that way, and it continues to get worse every single day, especially with social media and stuff, that we don't take the moment to actually hear what someone is telling us. We heard it, just like when we tell our kids to go do something, like, I heard you, and then it doesn't get done. We're hearing it on that level, but we're not actually hearing someone, right? So we're missing those opportunities because we are so quick to put our judgment out there that we are hindering other people. And I talk about this a lot when I talk to law enforcement and university students, but especially my law enforcement. 15 to 55% of police calls throughout the United States are domestic violence related. This is not a call that they get once in a blue moon that they go on. It is a
Yeah.
regular and sometimes repeated occurrence, but
Yeah.
they get 0.5% of the story, right? Just like anyone else that is listening to a friend or that maybe works in social work, psychology, anything, you are getting a percentage. Now, our brain loves to fill in the gaps.
Yep.
That's how we are designed. So what do? God, well, I've been here 3 times and they still haven't decided to do anything different. This is stupid. Why am I here? Take the report. Yeah, I got it. Okay, cool. Here's your stuff. I know you're not going to leave, and then take off. But maybe in that moment, that person said something to you that you hadn't heard before, but you missed it because you already made your judgment. And that's where being able to shut up and let someone speak, but also give them a moment of silence to see if they want to continue so that you can really hear what is being said. And that's what I really do with law enforcement and university students is not only do we talk about domestic violence, but I actually go into the details and give them specifics of things that happened to me because I want them to have a full 360 view. So the next time that they go on that call, that they're like, here we go again. Instead of them judging, they can remember that conversation that we have and go, I'm not getting the whole story. Maybe I should give them another chance. That's what I want to do because that is sometimes what we need so that we as the survivor can get out of that situation. And I know this because of numerous officers that I dealt with. And I remember the ones that were like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, here's my card. Okay, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, take the report. And then they're gone. But I remember the ones that every time I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I have to call you again. I know that you have other things that are more important. They're like, no, ma'am, this is absolutely fine. This is important. Those are the people that made me feel like I mattered. Like everything that I was telling them, even though I was probably repeating it for the 15th time, was worth hearing. And again, that is something that is taken away from us because for so long we have been told who we are, how we think, how we should act, if we're doing it wrong. We need people to be able to listen to that. And that's the space I want to create because especially when we talk about universities, those are students that are going into a field to help someone. Well, you can read a textbook all day long and you can listen to a story that's in that textbook, and I guarantee you're going to take in 2% of that knowledge. But sit in a classroom for 2 hours, listen to someone share their story, and be able to ask honest questions back to them, anything that's on your mind. That story is going to stick with you tenfold more than that story that you read in a book. And so that's what I do is I leave that space for that open communication. I always host a Q&A after the speech and I leave it completely open and I tell them there is no question that is off the table. Ask away because we don't get the chance to ask those questions. And sometimes it just takes being curious and being able to understand from your perspective to connect the dots. And if that takes that moment, that means that you save somebody else's life because now you listen to them, then I feel like my purpose here has been fulfilled.
Yeah. It's always amazing too in an environment where people feel like they don't want to ask a question because, oh, it's the dumb one, because obviously there's no dumb questions. The thing is that they'll ask a question and then it will spark, I'm sure, I'm not in your courses, but that other people are having that same question because it's such an intimate conversation, but it needs to be out in the light. And so the question that's coming up for me is when you explain a law enforcement person and they go in and they have that judgment going on. Now, I'm presuming this may be a judgment on my part that most of them are men. And so men have a different construct of the world. And it is so critical that you're there giving a different viewpoint of this. And so, how many percentage wise do you think men in your courses are having an aha moment of, wow, I never thought of that before? Because that to me is the biggest shift is that you're helping the people that are in direct contact with them. 15 to 55% of all calls are that. Well, I hope that they on the front line are getting a new epiphany. So, tell me some of the aha moments that you've seen with them.
Oh, I love this. You know what's really interesting is yes, a lot of our law enforcement are men. There are definitely some women that are always in these classes. And I can tell you that 98% of the time, every single person in there asks at least one question. And my guys will actually ask things that are very thought-provoking. I had one gentleman that he said, thank you for sharing your story. I've never actually heard the other side of it. I didn't realize that those are some of the things that you go through even after you get out. He said, so, on my next call, what can I do different to make
Mm.
sure that that person feels safe? That wasn't
Wow.
from a woman. That was from a man.
Wow.
That
That
was,
is in and of itself, that's huge. Yeah.
it's huge. It is. I am always amazed every single time that I speak with the law enforcement, how many of them want to understand. They
Mm.
want to understand, right? But they just don't know how. They don't have time. Nobody has explained it to them. And they
Mm.
are put in situations where, unfortunately, their lives are at risk. And so that safety has to be first. And so, another one that I recently got, which was an amazing question, um, and I got the reason behind it was when you left your situation and you know that you were having issues with him stalking, did you ever feel like your intuition let you know how far he might take it? And I thought, well, wow, that is one heck of a question. So I answered it, but what I found out was is he was asking it because he had a partner literally about a year and a half ago, and she was getting out of an abusive relationship. Now, she was law enforcement, she was an
Mhm.
officer, and that was his partner. And he said that, we kept people outside of her house as much as we could, and then things kind of settled down. And she said, I'm telling you, I have a really bad feeling. I have a really gut feeling that something is going to happen. And he said, we didn't really think much of it. He said, we still tried to have people parole. She ended up being shot in her house multiple times, and then he shot himself and set the place on fire.
Mm. Mm.
He felt like they could have done more,
Mhm.
but she didn't have the evidence.
Yeah.
But she was speaking to her intuition. Now, the beauty that came out of that is Tennessee is now the first state that has created a domestic violence registry list.
Wow.
And it is actually named after that officer. So it's called Savannah's Law. It was put into effect January 1st of 2026. And it is to help because what they didn't know was that he had actually already been arrested multiple times for domestic violence.
Mhm.
So, yes, you would think that law enforcement is very hardened, very shut down, very, this is my job and I don't need to know who you are. They have been some of the most open individuals
Wow.
that I have ever met. And it made me really realize that we really have to stop putting people on pedestals, and we really have to
Mhm.
stop saying that we think that this person is this because of who they are or the job that they do, and start realizing that we are humans first.
Yeah.
And a lot of
Yeah.
those officers are going through and hurting from things just like you and I are every single day. Yet
Yeah.
we put them off in this distant area and like, well, they're a part of the law. They should be able to handle it. Absolutely not.
No,
Right?
I think that's so amazing that we do. I don't know that it's a pedestal. I think we put them in a category like they have no feelings. I remember when I was growing up, the kids in my grade looked at teachers like they weren't human. And I think we do that. We do that with our first responders, our law enforcement, the things that they see every day. We could never, ever comprehend that. I think that's what's so amazing that you're putting that out there, that we don't have any idea that that is what's helping protect us and take care of us when there's emergencies. Firefighters, EMTs, all of those people have seen so many things that we couldn't even comprehend. We think we see something on television that we understand, and it just isn't. So I just love that you told that story because that is so important. When you're sharing about this new law, this is so important. Explain that a little bit more in detail because I think that should be in every state, that this is not something that just because somebody called. Like sometimes when the call happens, it's been going on for so long that the neighbors
Mm-hmm.
called, and it's so key that the indoctrination has already started. So tell me a little bit about this law because I think that's brilliant.
So I am really super excited. I think that it is definitely the first step in a right direction. And I do agree with you. I
Hmm.
think every single state should have this, just like we have those that have been raped. And once they've been convicted, they go on a list. It's the same
Registry,
thing.
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So now with Savannah's Law, this is the first to come out. So, right, there are some stipulations that have been put in place and some things that I don't necessarily agree with. However, I think it is again, that step in the right direction. So the way that it works is you will have to be convicted, so not just arrested. You will need to be
Hmm.
convicted, and you'll need to be convicted twice. Once you are convicted twice, then you are put on that registry. So it's the same thing, just like the other one, where you will be able to search it. It is going to be public information, so
Hmm.
that people can be more aware. And I think that the beauty of this law is, even though we have so much social media and ways to be in front of things, we don't think to necessarily look up that information, right? Like, why is this person treating me this way, or things like that. I know that we have buzzwords and stuff that we use on a repetitive basis, but there is still a huge population of us that we understand it and we may know it, but then we don't understand it when it's actually happening to us. It's like there's a complete disconnect. We just went right past, ourselves when it comes to that definition. And so this is going to allow people to be able to very easily look that person up and see what is going on. And I think that that is also going to give people the opportunity to say, oh my gosh, maybe it's not just me. It looks like this has already been happening. I didn't realize that I was in this specific situation. Now, is it going to solve everything? Absolutely not. Um, but I do think that it's going to give the opportunity for people to be more aware and maybe teach others to keep their hands to themselves. Um, again, there's always flaws with every new law that comes out, and I won't disclose that information just for the protection of anyone that is utilizing that. But I do think that it's very telling that we need to push more when it comes to making sure that these people are convicted, because there are so many of us and so many people I've talked to that have them arrested and they're like, never mind, I just want to get away from them and I just want to be done with it. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is now
Yeah.
your chance to take it to the next level and make sure that somebody else who is going to end up in that situation, that's going to end up in that relationship, that's going to think that that individual is absolutely amazing, you are giving them an opportunity to potentially know how to leave and why they might need to leave. Right now, everybody's going to do with that information what they will, but you could save another life.
It's no different than being raped. And there's so many women that have been raped that don't want to go through facing their accuser because of all the
Hmm.
things that it brings up. And yet, the real spark and motivation is so that it doesn't happen to another woman. And that is the
Absolutely.
same thing here. There's so much of it going on. I would love for you to share because it starts out insidiously. You don't even know that things are happening because you went through it, but also because you've talked to other women. Give us some of the things that some woman could say, oh, that is happening to me. And that could escalate. It doesn't mean that it will, but there are telltale signs from really early on. And it's only because it gets to a point where it's almost like you can't turn back that we
Hmm.
just don't. So, talk about a little bit of that because I think that it's important for women to hear I don't think anything's going on wrong with my life because we do. We go into our denial. And it really truly is. If you hear yourself in these symptoms, maybe it's time to look at a different path or look at something different for yourself.
Absolutely. I think that, and this is so beautiful because I think that even for myself, I thought, okay, well, if somebody is abusive, then they're just going to beat them and pound on them, and that person should
Mhm.
know, right? And you are absolutely right. It doesn't always happen that way. Are there some people that become physically aggressive very quickly? Absolutely. But usually what I see, and from a lot of those that I have spoken with, is it is very subtle, or it's things that we wouldn't consider that because in the moment it makes us feel good. I'll give you an example. So in my relationship, like I told you, I was craving to be loved by someone. So I already have something down for myself because I'm willing to let people overstep boundaries, which at that point in time, I didn't really have them anyway because I didn't know what that
Right.
was. So in that moment, it was, I want to spend every waking minute with him as much as I can, and he snatched onto that, right? So
Mm,
every time he could get with me, anytime that he could be around me, that is what happened. But then what I found was, I would come home from work, like at my lunch break, and he was probably about 12 minutes down the road. So I was like, oh, I'll go see him on my lunch break because we just love spending time together. But there were multiple times where he wouldn't open the door or he slept in too late. So he would wake up in the middle of me knocking. And then when I go to leave, he'd be like, oh, but please don't leave. Don't leave. I just want to spend more time with him. Like, but I have to go. Like, I'm going to be late. Now, after multiple times of that, I lost my job.
ah,
Right. So
yeah,
then that control starts to tighten because now you
right.
don't have an out. Right.
Yeah.
Another thing was, when I talked about my hopes and my dreams, and I always used to say, I don't want to be a stay-at-home mom. I want to be a working person. Like that's what he was like, yeah, that's what you're going to do. And every single thing I did, he just played right into it. Like I was 100% right and he was 100% behind me. There were no conversations. There were no goal planning. No, well, what does that look like? None of that, just playing right into it. So it gets to the point to where you're like, oh my gosh, this person loves me so much. They care about me
Hmm.
so much, right? Or maybe they bring you flowers all the time. And even if they do something, and this is where you'll start to kind of see a turn. Maybe you guys had an argument and they raised their voice a little bit and you got upset. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, sorry. I'm sorry. And all of a sudden there's like this big, huge thing. Oh, I didn't mean that. It won't happen again. I just lost my temper, blah, 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 blah. Right. So you get all these things and they call it love bombing. And then it happens again. And then the same thing
Hmm.
happens. Or for me, it was the opposite a lot of the times. We would get into an argument and I would get upset. Well, I'm a hothead, used to be. And so I would start raising my voice back. And if he realized in that point in time that he couldn't gain control of the situation, he would get upset. You don't understand me. You just don't. I don't think that you love me. I don't think that you know what I've been through. And it was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. No, I know exactly what you feel like. No, I love you. No, I would never do that to you. So it's these mind games that are played where you get to the point where you start questioning things. And then you're like, wait, did I say that? Did I really mean it that way? Am I the bad person? And when you start having thoughts like that, that's when you really need to be able to separate yourself to assess who you are as an individual and what is going on in that relationship. Because just like me, and like you said, it got to the point to where I didn't know how to leave. I was almost 4 years into the relationship when I was pregnant with my second son, and I was choked 6 months pregnant. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to leave. I didn't know how to leave. I didn't know what I was going to do with
Hmm.
my kids. He had family in law enforcement. He was like, it won't happen. You'll lose them. I was like, oh my gosh. So he played upon my biggest fear, and that was losing my kids.
Yeah.
So you get into this vicious cycle, but unfortunately, that cycle is not predictable. And so it feels like it happens, but then it doesn't happen. And then things are great. And then it happens again. You're like, well, that's kind of weird, but like really take a step back and really pay attention to those patterns because that is where I lost control, was not recognizing those patterns in the moment.
That is so patterns just creep up on us. They're like the boiling of the frog thing. If somebody hears themselves in this conversation and they really truly want to reach out to somebody for that psychological help, because that's really what this is at this point. They have to get somebody on their side that is in their corner that they feel safe with. Are there hotlines they can call? Is your nonprofit set up for that? Give an option for people that are listening to this. When somebody hears this and they are in it, they're going to feel that same spark. And just like you, maybe they're not ready yet, but then you had already
Hmm.
made that choice. And I always say the universe conspires and rearranges to give us what we're asking for, which was somebody showing up as a client going, you're going to the cops or I am. So what
Yeah.
is one thing that somebody could take away from that little story and say, wow, I think I need to reach out somewhere.
Yeah, I would say if you definitely feel like you are in the space of this is resonating and I don't know what to do, yes, there is a national domestic violence hotline that you can call, that you can text at any time during the day. I think they have over 200 and something languages with interpretation services as well. But I would also say look for your support systems as well, right? If you have a close friend or a family member or a coworker that you know you've disclosed things before, it might be worth having a conversation. There are domestic violence centers all over the United States. There's generally one that can be in your county or in the neighboring county. You can always reach out to them as well. Whether you decide to use their services or not, you can still contact them to get information, to get resources, to decide what it is that you want to do. And I say that because I actually had a woman that I was talking with not too long ago, and she is making the decision of leaving. And I said, I need you to contact this number if you start to feel unsafe. And she said, well, I just, I thought about it, but I know that people have it way worse than me. And I said, it does not matter. You deserve to be safe. I said, it does not matter if it is small. It does not matter if it has just begun. It does not matter because someone has had it worse. Your story is your story. Please reach out for help. You need it just as much as anyone else does. And that is what those services are for. So I think that we downplay where we're at in a situation or what is going on, or we think, oh, well, somebody else has it so much worse, so maybe I'll leave that for them. Absolutely not. Especially not in this situation. You have to make that decision.
Yeah, and I can't downplay enough the idea that this is a courageous act. Not that domestic violence doesn't happen to men. There is a percentage, but it is
Absolutely.
mostly women. And it takes a tremendous amount of courage, and I know you can testify to that, to make this shift for you in your life. And yet it is for you, it is for your children, it is for those people that are in your sphere so that you can be an example for other women as well. So talk about some of that courage that you came through this experience for the last 10 years, because I know it wasn't just one decision of courage, it was constant reassessing, am I courageous enough to make this decision?
Mm. First off, Debbie, can I just absolutely thank you for using the word courage instead of strength? Thank you so much for
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And I say that because so many times along my journey after I made the decision to get out, so many people were like, oh, you're so brave, you're so strong, blah, 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 blah. And every time that they said it, I felt so disconnected because I'm like, I feel so weak. I feel so controlled. I feel like I can't do anything. I'm like, I don't feel like brave at all.
Yeah.
Courage is a word that I use very, very intentionally to
Mhm.
this day. And I say that because the definition of courage is the willingness to face the adversity or the fear. And sometimes
Right.
that's all that you need. You don't need the strength, you don't need to be tough, you don't need to have so much behind you like I can do this. It is
No.
the willingness. It is that little tiny spark of I don't know what to do, but I think I'm going
Mhm.
to lean into this because I want to do something different. That is all that it takes. It's the moment of deciding to step over the line. I think about it, when you first learn to swim, you're like, oh, I'm going to drown. And you're like, I'm going to jump. I'm just going to jump, right? And you jump into the water. That is what that is. It is the willingness to face that fear, to face that adversity. That is all that you need. And it takes courage every day to make that decision and not feel like you should have made a different decision. Commit to what it is that you decide to do when you decide to leave. And just know that you are now going to be able to have a choice to choose where you want to take your life. And that, even though you don't understand the outcome and know it yet, um, is way better than the situation you could potentially be in right now. But I use courage all the time. I use courage every
Yeah.
single time I repeat my story, every
Mhm.
time that I get into a moment of emotion, because this is a part of me. It's never going to not be a part of me. And, every time that I share certain things, like, when I was talking earlier about my kids, I still get choked up because I can vividly see that moment, but I know that it's making a difference. And
Mhm.
courage is choosing to make that difference. You take yourself out of that equation. It's not about you, it's not about the judgment. It is about what it's going to do for your life or for your children or how it's going to make a difference. And I use that on a regular basis to this day, even with having conversations with my kids now and letting them know of the things I feel like I failed on and where I know that I'm not doing good and stuff like that, which takes a lot of courage, a lot of vulnerability. But we have to start teaching that more in the world instead of living in a space of everything is perfect, everything is fine, I can make it. Bullcrap. Everyone
Yeah.
is going through things. We need to stop going through it alone and deciding that we can actually grow together
Mhm.
through the adversities that we face.
Yeah. I say courage is feel the fear and do it anyways, because that's really what it is. There's not no fear. Fear is everywhere. And are we courageous enough to step up to that? I wish I could go for another hour, but here's the thing. I know you have a podcast,
Real chat with Kat.
Real Chat with Kat, so it'll be in the show notes. I just love it. And you speak, so I'll put in your website so that people connect with you and your nonprofit. Is there anything else you'd like for them to check out? A ebook, a assessment, a conversation with you that people can connect with you in a different way? Because I know that there's people on here that hire speakers, so that I'm putting that out there, but also just how do you want people to respond to you if for some reason or if they just feel that connection, because I know that I'm feeling a connection with you. I don't have the things we're talking about, but yet it is that energy, and I'm all about energy and frequency. So your energy is just so powerful. And I know that that will come across to everybody that listens to this.
Oh, thank you so much, Debbie. Yeah, so the podcast is a great space to be in. We focus on entrepreneurs and people that are having pivots and failures in their life, so we can create support and connection through those real conversations. The website is a great place to go, especially if you're looking for a speaker. But I would also say, if you feel really called, if you feel really connected, if you don't have anyone to reach out to, DM me, send me a private message. I would love to talk with you. Even if I can't do anything, I can provide spaces, support other people that I know, or just lend an ear in that moment. So I would definitely say, reach out. The other thing is going to be the YouTube channel. So we do have a YouTube channel that has all the podcast episodes as well as some of the other speaking pieces and things that I've done. So you can always go and check that out as well. It's the dash lotus dash effect, or you can just look it up underneath my name. But yeah.
I know that you are just a beautiful gift to the world and you are making an impact. And that's one of my favorite words for this year, curiosity and impact. Impact is how we shift the planet. And you are doing that in a very, very special way, especially for women. So I can't tell you how grateful I am that you took your time today to share with us. And I can't
Oh,
wait to have you
thank
back at some later
you.
date.
Absolutely.
Thanks.